The red-crowned crane is a bird close to the hearts of many peoples throughout Asia. With their beautiful dances and striking coloration, they are a source of inspiration for poetry and painting throughout the centuries, and are a symbol of good fortune, longevity, and whose monogamy and dedication to their partners is associated with fidelity in one's marriage. These birds are among the largest and heaviest extant crane species, and with their cultural significance it is unsurprising that when it came to designing a new bird wyvern for the lands around Kimura village for Monster Hunter Rise, that a crane would be chosen as the inspiration. Found in the shrine ruins in the Frost Islands, the Aknosom, or Parasol bird in its quite literal translation, takes this inspiration and runs with it. The monster that the development team produced has the characteristic long beak, build, and even habit of standing on one leg as cranes, but other aspects of its design has come from something far more supernatural. Like many of the other new monsters introduced in Rise, Aknosom takes a great deal of inspiration from not only earthly creatures, but yokai as well. In this case, a somewhat curious one called the Kasa-Obake. But as good as it is for me to tell you all of this, let's take a look at the Kasa-Obake and see how elements of the yokai have come to the fore in the design of Aknosom, and see where legend became reality in Monster Hunter Rise. Before we talk about the Kasa-Obake in particular, however, we must first understand a different type, or perhaps to be more correct, category of yokai entirely. In the old days, objects were almost exclusively handmade. Mass production with factories was not to come for a long time, and frequently these objects would be carefully passed down the generations of a family from father to son and mother to daughter. Used extensively, but also cared for, and would often reach venerable ages. It is said that an object in Japan that reaches 100 years of age gains a soul and becomes self-aware, and frequently gain various magical powers or attributes dependent on what sort of object they are and how they have been used. Objects like this become tsukomogami, which crop up in art about yokai in all manner of forms. Some are helpful, some are mischievous, but ultimately harmless, and in some rare cases, especially if they've been abandoned or mistreated, tsukomogami may even be malevolent. There is frankly a greater variety of tsukomogami than I could possibly describe in a single video, or even in a full encyclopedia. Suffice it to say, if there is some sort of household object used in the Japanese home, there is likely a tsukomogami for it, with stories dedicated somewhere in Japan. In fact, when I first learned about them, I spent an entire evening that I should have been working on an essay for my degree, just typing random words into the internet followed by tsukomogami to see what sort of result I would get. There are tsukomogami for old scrolls who reassemble themselves into dragon-like forms, inkstones whose ink recreates noises and sights and sounds from famous battles that they have been used to write about over and over again, and even little samurai pieced together from broken crockery who wield chopsticks to chase and terrify a kitchen staff, despite not reaching taller than the said staff's knee. There are several types of umbrella tsukomogami, and plenty more regional and local varieties of those to boot. For example, there's the Hone Karakasa, an umbrella who's been damaged in high winds to the point that the paper has been stripped from the tines, so that they almost resemble the bones and fins of a fish. This yokai flies through the air, not unlike how a fish swims through water, and typically signify that there is some truly bad weather to be on the way, which is when they spring to life and take to the sky. Another yokai, which is very similar in physical description to the actual yokai of the video, is the Gasa, whose presence paralyzes people in place with terror, only releasing them when it is blown away by strong winds. But the most famous of these umbrella tsukomogami is the Kasa-Obake, which upon becoming a yokai gains an eye and a tongue and hops around on their singular leg. Although, in some cases, the Kasa-Obake has a second leg and even a pair of arms. Quite often the Kasa-Obake like to pull tricks on people, their favourite being to sneak up behind them and then lick them with their long tongue before hopping away as fast as they can. Kasa-Obake are a little odd in that they have no eyewitness stories or definitive folklore story about them, as in no concrete definition that historians can look to and say, yes, this is the original story for this yokai before it branched out. They are relatively ubiquitous, and this aspect of their existence has helped them to become relatively popular as far as yokai go. Whether it be an anime that includes yokai, films, or video games, the Kasa-Obake make for a quirky, interesting addition, alongside recognizable other yokai for Japanese viewers, and they're odd enough to gain the attention of foreign audiences as well. With the Kasa-Obake introduced, I'd like to just take a moment and a small tangent to discuss another yokai. I've seen in several places that a possible additional inspiration for the Aknosom is the Basan, which is a yokai found only on the smallest of Japan's main 4 islands, Shikoku. Somewhat popularized as fire-breathing chickens, Basans certainly resemble fowl and have a number of supernatural abilities, most notably that their breath flows from their mouths like fire but produces no heat. Without confirmation from the Rise design team, I feel that this is more a case of being similar enough to be worth comparison, but not an actual basis for the Aknosom's design, especially seeing how Aknosom's physiology is based on a crane and its flame is actually damaging. Perhaps in future DLCs we'll see a Aknosom based more closely on the Basan, and it will inflict some terrible status ailment that makes the community loathe and hate it in equal measure. So, where in Aknosom's behaviour, design and materials can we see the influence of the Kasa-Obake? Well, for the foremost, the influence of the yokai is most apparent when Aknosom is hopping. As mentioned earlier, this is how Kasa-Obake are most often described and depicted moving about. And furthermore, when the Aknosom is hopping and posed like this, the front of the monster almost resembles the Kasa-Obake, if you stretch your mind a little bit. The centre of the monster's crest almost resembles the central eye, and the join of the wings and beak almost resemble a tongue protruding from a mouth. If we look at Aknosom's materials, they near universally tend to be used in the production of crafts or high-quality objects, but 2 of them more directly relate to the Kasa-Obake. The Aknosom feather in particular mentions that it is a feathered Aknosom scale treasured for its use in umbrellas, sturdy but light. And for this I feel there's not much I really need to say on it. The Aknosom crest is perhaps the more interesting of the 2, however, as it reads, an Aknosom comb. The eyeball motif on the forehead shows up in many a ghost story. Seeing how when the monster is hopping the centre part of the crest is drawn in and looks not unlike the central eyeball of the Kasa-Obake, it's interesting that the part specifically mentions ghost stories. Many yokai start out as quirky stories to entertain, and it's quite possibly how the Kasa-Obake started, with a made-up encounter with a living umbrella on a dark night. I personally am rather interested to see just what sorts of ghost stories the people of Komura Village share with one another about Aknosom, although I must admit it's rather doubtful we'll ever get to read or hear them in full. Unfortunately, the equipment hunters can build with Aknosom parts has little relation to the Kasa-Obake and its legend, mostly being styled on a somewhat fantastical approach to aristocratic weapons and armour from Europe. It would have been nice to have something more related to the Kasa-Obake in terms of Aknosom's signature weapons and armour. There is the Ninja Parasol line of greatswords that uses Aknosom Feather Plus as part of its 2nd upgrade, and whilst it might be a little goofy, an upgrade that borrows more from the Kasa-Obake in some way, or even another Umbrella Yokai would certainly be interesting. And in a game series that has had a frozen marlin as a weapon in the past, who knows what we might have in future in terms of endgame umbrella weapons that require Aknosom parts. So then, that is Aknosom and the Kasa-Obake. I hope you enjoyed learning about the inspiration behind this new monster. Aknosom may be the early game bird wyvern for Rise, following in the tradition of Yankoku and Kurapeko, but I've always been rather fond of these early gamers, their designs, and how they teach the player about the game and its mechanics. I'm looking forward to seeing some variants of Aknosom that draw inspiration from other yokai in future. Who knows, perhaps we'll have a Hone Karakasa inspired Aknosom that makes better use of its ability to fly and comes with rain and storms in some way. Or we might have a Basan variant whose breath inflicts status ailments or some other curious effect. Please let me know if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you have interest in seeing future videos about the yokai origins of various Monster Hunter monsters. But until then, happy hunting everyone.